Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with my friends today in this writing community. I'm joined by our co-hosts, Melissa Stroh, Brandy Bro, Norma Poor, Jan Martin, and Jeannie Wise. Jeannie's going to be our speaker today. We're going to talk about, or at least facilitating discussion here. We're going to be talking about, does weather affects the writer? I will say yes, we had rain yesterday all through the night, and I woke up with a high pressure headache this morning. So
yes, we're going to talk about it. Yep.
So just really quick, Jeannie is a freelance writer, speaker, retreat leader, spiritual director. She's written several books, including Let Every Heart Prepare Him Room and Advent Devotion. So this is a good time for that. Whispers, Being with God in Breath Prayers, Spiritual Retreats, A Guide to Slowing Down to Be with God. She has written a wonderful Christmas devotional book too. The name of it escapes me, but I read it every year as preparing for Christmas. Okay. And this is just a really cute thing I found on Jeannie's website this morning. When she was 7, she created, wrote, and delivered a neighboring newspaper, a writer in the works at a young age until she felt God calling her into nursing. So she was an RN for a long time. She worked for her local county as the public health director for a long time. And then now she is very involved in ministry and with writing and speaking, and specializes in spiritual direction. So we are so excited to have Jeannie with us today to talk about weather.
We wanted to come up with something totally different. Thank you, Johnny, and stuff. And I asked you guys to stay on because I'm gonna have you guys participate through part of this. And I just wanted the hands-on. As a nurse, I've always been interested on how weather affects us. And then as writers, weather can be such an interesting tool, but it affects us also as writers. And so I think it's just, I hope this just kind of a little bit different topic for us to think about today. So I'm going to start off with a phrase, and I want you guys to see, I think you guys will all know this, but it's a phrase. It was a dark and stormy night. Yep, everybody kind of knows that one, didn't it? And that's been kind of classified as one of the worst opening lines ever. It's such a cliche, though it wasn't a cliche when it was first written. Who wrote it?
Was it Bulwer or something like that? It starts with a B, doesn't it?
Oh, I didn't even think anybody would come near that. You're close, Johnny. Anybody? I thought somebody would guess Snoopy.
Yeah, well, Snoopy wrote it often.
Often and often.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Anybody else want to take a guess?
I'm thinking Winnie the Pooh.
Hey, that would have been a good one.
In one of their little TV shows or something.
No, Johnny's
I really don't remember.
I didn't know it till I looked it up. And I thought I'd read you the full first paragraph that was in, then I'll introduce you to the name of this. And this is how the first paragraph of his book started. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except for occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept across the streets, rattling across the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness.
You know, he was proud of that.
He was proud of that.
He was really proud of that paragraph.
Yeah, Yvonne's guessing Edgar Allan Poe, but so what did you think his name was again, Johnny?
I think it starts with the BBU something, because there's a contest named after him for the.
There is. I was going to be his name is Edward Bulwer, Bulwer hyphen Lytton, Lytton. He was the first person who coined that phrase, and his novel was written or published, probably published 1830, and it was called Paul Clifford, and it's a story about a highway robber during the French Revolution. And that's where he he wrote it. Oscar Lewis, we're getting some other that. I'll put his name in the chat here in a few minutes, so you got it for sure. But and then in the 80s, San Jose State University started a contest named after him. Johnny, I'm impressed you knew this detail. That they gave a prize to the very worst possible first sentence in a novel, where they kind of channeled this kind of run-on, overly descriptive style, so I don't know if it's still going on today, but it was at least in the 80s and 90s they had that. So, and not that we want to model ourselves and write the worst sentence, but I just thought that was interesting. So when he wrote this, it wasn't a cliche, but it is kind of overly descriptive, but it pulls you right in. And most people would tell you, and Johnny, I'd be interested in maybe our other fiction writers, especially like Melissa and stuff. I'm hearing a lot of times somebody says, don't ever start a book with the weather. Have you heard that?
Absolutely, I've heard that. You can do it, but you have to be very careful doing it. And often it's for more literary type works, but it is a cliche, and that's why you don't want to do it, is because if you don't do it extremely, extremely well, it just doesn't work.
And thank you, Heidi, for putting his name in. She's got that correct.
Yes, there you go.
And there it is. So you can see that and stuff. I've heard that too. And that's the one thing, I'll kind of qualify this whole kind of discussion of weather, is that you can't overuse it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tool in our toolbox, just like adverbs. You can use adverbs, you just don't want to overuse adverbs. You don't want to overuse adjectives. You don't want to overuse, we can overuse almost any tool that we've got as writers. So it can add something, but you got to be cautious of it too. And I'll kind of say that again at the end, but I just kind of qualify that as we talk about the weather. So it can be helpful to writers with some caution on that. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the weather. We're going to start off with some just general things about the weather. And then we're going to talk about how weather affects us as human beings, because we aren't just writers, we're human beings. So how does it affect our process as writers? So that's just a little part. And then we'll finish up with a discussion about how we can use weather within our writing and stuff. So that's sort of where I think we're going. So we're going to start with a weather trivia quiz. So here we go. You guys all ready? I got about 5 questions here for you. Okay.
Yeah, do we need to write these down?
No, we're gonna just do one at a time and stuff. I kind of warned them. I want you guys that are listening to this or in the chat, I warned them they were going to stay on and participate. I just didn't tell them what we were going to do. But anyway, any idea or take a guess at the number of what has been the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth? No looking it up or anything.
111.
Oh my God.
111. I'm seeing 140, 128, 120.
I'm thinking 145.
111, so that's not it.
What did you say, Melissa?
I said I've been in 111, so I know it's more than that. And 120 I've seen.
Okay.
So 150.
150.
I was gonna say 104. I would have been way off. Wow.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
forget about the desert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
yeah.
130.
I would say even 145. I don't know. That's already been said. So let's say like 155. I'll go.
155. You guys are generally in the range. The hottest in the United States has been Death Valley. There's a Brandy that said the desert was 134.06.
Wow.
But the hottest ever recorded was in Africa, 136. And that was in 1922.
Now, was that like actual temperature or real field temperature?
That was actual temp Fahrenheit. So probably felt worse.
I'm sure it
The
did.
heat index probably felt worse in some of these places. So let's do the opposite. What's the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth?
Ooh, minus.
Negative 60.
Minus what? 60?
60.
I said minus 50. This is Fahrenheit, right?
Fahrenheit. Yeah, because
Sorry,
when I first looked this up, it was in Celsius. I said, well, that's not going to work. Yeah, Fahrenheit. So I did find it in Fahrenheit.
70 below.
70
Yeah, I'd say like 65 below.
on that. Let's see. I've seen in the thing. I like this. Sophia said her a friend's son moved to Arizona and his shoes melted in the parking lot. Now
I
that's a
have
good
had that
scene for a
happen.
book. That's a good scene. Now I know the coldest was in inland Antarctica. You're correct on that, Catherine. It is in Antarctica where it was minus 55, 75. You guys are far off on this one. Minus 144.
Oh my
my
gosh.
Can you? Oh no,
No,
I can't.
no, cannot imagine.
Imagine that 144.
Oh
Now,
my
this is going to be a fun question because I know I know right now what you're going to think about when I ask this. Okay. What causes yellow snow seen in some parts of the earth?
My dog going out to the bathroom.
Other animals that live outside.
Sulfur.
Of that. Pam got it right. It's pollen.
Pollen.
In some
Pollen.
parts of
My first thought was uric acid. I'm like, no, that's not right.
But doesn't your mind, yellow snow goes, I went right to an animal, that. So I just cracked up when I saw that one.
Pollen's
Okay.
a much nicer answer.
I still wouldn't need it
I'm
though.
just trying to figure out, how do you get pollen and snow together? Because usually snow
Right.
covers everything that has pollen. So
No,
at least here. So
Yeah,
I'm
there you
trying to
go.
figure that one out.
yeah.
Maybe
Here
it
in North-
bleeds through.
Mhm.
Maybe
Here in
what?
North, sorry.
Maybe it bleeds through the snow.
Mm,
Maybe.
it could be.
Norma?
Pam says there's a ton of pollen clouds coming off the cedar trees right now.
Here
I
in
don't
North
know.
Carolina,
Go ahead, Norma.
sorry. I think my connection has a little bit of a delay because there was a long pause at one point with Jan, and that's why I started to jump in. So I apologize, Jan. Here in North Carolina, we can have we have kind of a bipolar spring, and it can be in the 70s and pollen everywhere, and the next day we could have snow,
Yep.
literally.
Yeah.
And it's not super thick. It's not, like feet deep. So we would experience some of that yellow snow.
Yeah. So you'd see it. And wouldn't that make an interesting scene in a book?
Mhm.
A little
Yeah.
different something. I don't know. We could do something with that scene. So now the next two questions, and I got just three left. So the next two, I think we could relate to a book idea too. That what has been the fastest winds in a tornado?
Well, I'd say over.
175.
No idea.
Yeah.
Jan said
210.
what? 175? Okay. What else? What other guesses?
210.
210?
Yeah. I would say up there also maybe in the low 200s, I think. I don't know. I was thinking hurricane winds because
Mhm.
Jan and I are familiar with hurricane winds. I
Hurricane
don't know who
winds.
else is, but
Yeah.
yeah, I've lived through lots of hurricanes. So
Yeah. With Jan, I see, no, Heidi. I see Heidi, and that is about the closest, but it was even a little faster, Heidi.
wow.
286 miles per hour in Wichita Falls, Texas, April 2nd, 1958. I think that'd be a great setting for a book.
Yeah.
Think about that, 1958. Can't you already start seeing the scenes in Wichita
Yeah.
Falls, Texas, and and of course it's spring, and I don't know. I just thought that sounded like a setting for a book
Yeah.
on that way. We're going to talk about Pam in the movie Twister. We're going to talk about Twister in just a little bit. She's talking about Twister in the chat on that. Now, and then the second question related to this, and then I'll just have one more. What's the longest tornado path? The longest time a tornado was on the ground.
Wasn't
No
that
idea.
just recent where one in the Midwest was, I think
thought
they
so.
said it was the longest, at least in a long time.
I thought so too, and I looked that up, and it turns out that the one that it's recorded that I'm going to share with you, it was longer, but they
Wow.
referred to that one that destroyed Mayfield. Is it Mayfield,
Mhm.
Kentucky? Destroyed Mayfield was one of the longest, but I look back on some of those reports too, Norma. So you're exactly right, on that. No, nobody want to take a guess? How many miles? It's a lot.
300.
No idea.
293 miles.
Oh my
It
Wow.
occurred in 1917. It traveled from Missouri to Indiana. And the scenario I thought to throw out to you novelists who like that, think about that. You could have sets of characters like a family that were moved apart. Somebody moved out to Missouri from Indiana, be affected by the same tornado. Wouldn't that be a neat
Yeah, that's
thing
amazing.
within a storyline based on facts? You know, and I bet 1917, you could probably find some historical data about that or settings or what all happened and on that. And I could just thought that would be not cool, but you know what I mean? Add conflict, tension, a plot to your story. Okay, last one on that is crickets. Crickets are called the poor man's thermometer because it directly affects their activity. So how do you calculate the temperature when you listen to crickets? Anybody know the formula?
No, but you're making me think that I should go haul out my farmer's almanac.
It's probably in there, I think. I bet it is.
That's a good resource for novelists too.
There you go. There, that's a good tip. It is. I like it. Sally says, "Yeah, well, it's crickets because we don't know how to do."
Nobody knows.
I couldn't remember the formula, so I'm cheating because I have my notes in front of me.
Well,
But
Heidi mentioned chirps per second.
Yeah.
That sounds
That sounds good.
about right.
yeah, you count the chirps for 15 seconds, and then you add the number 37. That's what I'd read.
Oh,
And then
Catherine
some
was
of that was close to the
Yeah.
outside temperature. So as crickets come out, we don't have crickets yet in Ohio because it's a little early yet, but they'll be out in summer and stuff. Let's try to remember that. You count for 15 seconds and then add the number 37.
I'll try to remember that the next time a cricket is stuck in my house and it's driving me crazy.
That's true. That's true. On that, I think that'd be a neat children's story, for example. You know, yeah. How when the crickets learn to count, what do? Carry little digital thermometers? You know, you could have a mommy cricket trying to teach the baby cricket and have math in there. You know, I think you know. On that, I think it'd be just fun way trivia. Weather's all around us. It's universal, so that's why it can appeal to our readers and appeal to us, and we can use it when it's used wisely on that way. Now, I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about how weather affects us as human beings because it does affect our bodies. So my question for our gals here today that are on the air here: how does the weather affect you? What's one symptom that you see or feel or know of?
Like I said earlier, headache. You know, I woke up with a headache this morning, and I think it was weather related.
The change in the barometric pressure definitely affects me when it starts out here. You get the wind that starts like the day or 2 days before a real storm comes in. It's just howling wind and blowing, and you feel the pressure in your whole body, and it tends to build up headaches or things like that. And then the storm comes, and the next thing you're like immediate relief from the pressure, but then there's the storm. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, when it's gloomy outside, it's hard to stay in a good mood.
It is. And we've had a couple people note seasonal affective disorder, and
Yeah, our oldest daughter has that. She's much better living in Florida than Michigan.
yeah.
One of the things that I do to feel better is I'll go and I'll sit outside in my back steps and I'll sit in the sun, and it helps me just my whole body feel better, and it boosts my mood.
I agree. Norma, were you going to add something to tell that earlier?
No, I just agree with Johnny when we have, if it's just a little bit of rain that comes through, I'm okay. But if it's a big storm system that comes through, then I end up battling migraines like I am today. It's just, and it was weird because it wasn't like that when I was a kid. It didn't seem to affect me as much as it has over the past like 10 years.
That 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Sally says, I feel better when it's cool and overcast. And we're going to talk about this in just a minute, Sally, on that way. And then somebody just said, I like Dennis. Rainy days and Mondays always get me down. We could sing. I never thought about that. We should have music today. That's great, Dennis. And that, oh, and Brandy got dizzy. You got dizzy, huh? On
Yep.
that. You know, I don't know about you, because a lot of times I see it the day before as the pressure drops, you know, not as much as once it comes. A lot of times do feel better. A lot of people get joint pain, and that, and headaches is a key one, really key one, that with sinuses on that.
Ear
It's just-
pressure too, and sometimes it makes it so you can't hear.
Yeah, in your ears and all that.
Yep.
You gotta, because we're full of cavities, we're full of spaces, we're 70% water, you know, our human bodies are, and on that. And so it will affect us on how we feel and how we function. And one of the big things, that turn something off there. One of the big things is, you guys didn't mention, but I'm an old OB nurse. Uh-huh. You see, there's parametric pressure drops, you get an increase in the labor and delivery on that. You get
Mhm.
you see more
That's true.
babies
Yep.
born in that. Boy, that's why babies are born in blizzards a lot of
Mhm.
times, you know, not that
Why
they
we- why
all
we see
come
the
one.
shadow.
Yeah. So, you know,
Mhm.
you see it, but again, that gives you plot ideas and delivery ideas on that way. So I'm going to skim my notes for joint pain. A lot of times you feel stiffer on that. That's why retirees, Jan likes to move to the Sun Belt. I'm telling you that on that way. Sinuses, ears, Migraine Foundation, Norma, says a correlation between migraines and the drop of the atmospheric pressure and air temperature, as well as increased humidity, can trigger the pain in people for migraines. So it's very, very legitimate. One on a sat, usually your blood pressure's lower in summer because of the temperature. And one sad thing is suicides are often more seasonal. You see more suicides in the month. Anybody want to guess which month?
Probably
December.
January.
I was going to say January or February.
Actually, the month is April. And they've done
Really?
some studies on that, in that January and February, there people don't have the energy to, and come spring, they start picking up and they have just enough energy to say, yeah, I'm done. This is what I'm going to do. So a little bit more on that. So I think that's that. So what the point is of this is, how does it affect you as a writer, and how can you schedule, especially if you're under a deadline or you want to get something done. You got to know how the weather affects you, because it will. So that's part of that tool in our toolbox on that way, on that. Pam said the research she did showed what's happened at Christmas time. Maybe that's old research. I know when I was in public health, we knew April was it's more my, it's what we saw locally here. So there could be some national statistics there, but April makes sense in some ways, but so does Christmas. It's hard, you know, it's hard on that way. So the trick is to understand how it affects you, so you could plan your writing schedule around it. Now, this is part of the discussion that I think it was Heidi, somebody mentioned earlier, about how sometimes she writes better on overcast days and some of us write better on sunny days. How about you guys? Which, if you had the choice, what gives you more energy to write, or what do you think? Which way? When are you more productive?
Cool and sunny.
Cool and sunny. Okay, there you go.
I'm probably going to throw people off, but that's the difference in our zone too. It's cool and nice sunny days that aren't too hot are definitely true for us, but also those really nice, warm, drizzly rain days, because we don't see a lot of rain. So rain is really nice to us, and it's a relief, and it just feels fresh and warm. It's like stepping out into this nice warm shower. So I love it when it's just a very gentle rainfall and you can get out there and you can smell the sagebrush and everything, and it just feels fresh. And so to open up a window and be sitting at the computer and smelling that, that's refreshing to the soul to me.
And you got a good point about where we live. You know, to
Mhm.
me in Ohio, spring and summer is a wonderful time. I have a lot more energy there. But if I was in Florida with Jan, that's a really hot, draining time, isn't it? To be outside.
The
So
summers are hard.
yeah. So so it takes a difference. What I thought was interesting was some of the now I read some conflicting research on this, but the majority of the things that I read in preparation today that says most people are more productive on overcast days than on sunny days. Now I felt the opposite, so that surprised me.
Maybe that depends upon somebody's occupation. If it's an overcast day, people might tend to stay inside more and do more inside. And if it's a nice warm sunny day, they go out and do things that are outdoors or chores that they have to do out of the house.
That was one study. They said take your the pictures of your summer beach vacation off your screensaver because I could distract you, make you not focus on your writing per se. I thought that was hysterical on that. Because
Looking out my window with the palm trees and the pond, when it's sunny, it's in a little light breeze. I want to just look at it. I don't want to write.
So yeah. So could you see how that can influence your productivity as a writer, to be, to be aware of it? And I think that's something. So most of the research showed, I thought this was one interesting study. They looked at, we got to find it. Oh, they looked at employees at a Tokyo bank, and they studied their productivity over 2 years, correlated with their weather statistic over the same period of time. The results showed the more gloomy the weather and the lower visibility, the more productive the office workers were in completing their bank transactions. I think it's because they weren't distracted as much.
Right.
But
I can I add something to that? In the past, my family is like a racing family, and so oftentimes I would go to the racetrack and I would sit and I would write at the racetrack because the noise is so loud. You can't communicate with other people. You can't hear them. They can't really hear you. So it's like, well, okay, I give up. But it might be so loud, but it allowed me to sit down and think and really focus on writing. So I could get a lot of writing done. So you have lots of noise, nice warm sun beaming down on me as long as it wasn't too hot. And I could get a ton done. And I had people that would come into the racetrack and say, how can you write in this? I'm like, just because, I can't communicate very far beyond me. So this environment, this weather, this certain environment now that I'm writing it, I can do that because it just let me. So it's kind of funny how sometimes when you have your outer circumstances that you just can't interact with because either it's too dark and gloomy, you can't see, or it's super foggy, it allows you to just kind of focus inward and get more done.
And isn't that interesting? So I think that's probably one of the bigger points is to how does this environment around you and outside affect you as a writer, to be knowledgeable of that, and then can you tweak it somehow, and to wear headphones and create white noise if you would need to, that the sort of thing. I have one of those seasonal affective disorder lamps right here on my desk, and I can't leave it on a long time because it does give me a headache if I leave it on too long. But if I put it on 5 minutes in the morning, it gets me going on a dreary Ohio. Somebody put Pennsylvania being dreary and Ohio's dreary in winter, and I think February is the longest month of the year, because of that. But it's you think how it affects you, know how it affects you individually, and then try to create the environment. Maybe like Jan, I'm sitting there, you close your curtains, on a day, you wanted to get something done, or you turn your back to the window per se, whatever you do, I think there's little tweaks. I like Leslie says she plays happy music or the sound of the beach or the forest when she writes. It changes her moods and stuff. Yeah. I know when I was writing the Advent devotions in the middle of spring, I think we've talked about this on a previous writer's chat. I lit a Christmas candle so it smelled like evergreens and played Christmas music, you know.
Yeah.
I created the environment to help me as a writer. So that's it. Any other comments about how weather affects you or environment affects you before we kind of go on about ways that writers can use weather in our writing? Did I miss anything? You guys nailed it. We kind of know how weather affects us, you know, on that. It's just being aware of that and use it as a tool, use it to our advantage. Okay. Ways writers can use the weather. This is where I want to pick your brain a lot of that time too, you know. And I'm going to read you a couple things. Weather is a tool to evoke mood, can guide characters towards emotions we want them to feel, and that would extend to the reader as well. We can have specific weather conditions. A character may feel safe or may feel threatened or may feel just confused or off balance. So it can work for or against our characters in our book. To create conflict, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, and tension. Can also use to foreshadow. I'm not an expert on foreshadowing, so I want a couple of you guys maybe to give us, maybe think about an example of that in a little bit, how you can use that, because I didn't find a strong example on that one. I think it's fascinating that we give storms names. You know, we've named hurricanes and typhoons for years. They're now naming winter storms up here. I don't know if anybody else in the northern part of the United States have noticed that. Now they name Gertrude the winter storm, you know, or something. That I just think it's fascinating. These weather patterns become almost invisible family members. They become characters in our books a lot of times on that way. And our language, just think of our language. We have all sorts of weather imagery in our language. We take the temperature of the room. Our minds are fogged. We skate on thin ice. We're a whirlwind of activity. We become flooded with emotion and we're frozen out of conversations. Isn't that interesting? Words are wonderful. I just love words. And again, to remind you that both as writers and our readers, weather is universal, actually universal on that. So keep that in mind. So the question, I'm going to give you 3 different weather conditions, and I want you guys to respond. What would that evoke in your characters? So let's take the weather condition of fog. What do you guys think about that?
Mystery and the unknown.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
My mind immediately went to like Sherlock Holmes and London, and I
Mhm.
guess San Francisco too is known for fog. And then but as soon as you go to London and you go to fog and you go to Jack the Ripper,
You go to fear.
Fear.
I went to
What's
Stephen
there?
King's The Mist movie, where everything was just covered in mist, and we had a couple years back we had 2 weeks worth of fog that was just really thick and wouldn't let up, and it was oppressive. I had never felt that before. It was just so oppressive, and I didn't know when the sun was going to come back. There was no visibility. I'm one of those people that really likes to see her bearings and needs to see the big picture, and the fog just cramped everything in and made me feel really uncomfortable for those whole 2 weeks. And I was really surprised by how uncomfortable I felt, and it made me think of that movie The Mist and how the characters must have been feeling uncomfortable and cramped and why they were so at each other all the time in the story.
Yeah, that's something to think about. And I got to go back up here. Pam had said something which I think is very interesting. Pam said can also make the character feel safe because they can be hidden. So see, it can be meaning almost the opposite. I went
Kind of depends on the character's personality. Yeah.
Character's personality on that, or the situation, the setting, the story, what's going on that. The big that you guys nailed it, a shroud of mystery, making us wonder what magical or unknown things could be taking place on the other side of the fog. We might use fog to symbolize the presence of unseen evil, but I like what Pam said. It could also hide something, hide a truth or something like that. It's uncertainty. And then think about the term we've used a lot of this after post-COVID is brain fog.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of it, on that. I love, Brandy, the word you used, oppressive, oh, that could take a lot of things. So there's an example. Fog. Okay. This one will be pretty easy too. What if I told you the weather condition, the wind? What would you do with that? What is that?
Irritable. It gets your ire up.
Ooh.
That's
Sure
funny.
is.
Now I think of when I was a kid and I used to stand on this slab of a rock that used to cover an old well. And I used to stand there and just come wind. So I would like direct the wind, So it's like, I don't think of those things. I think of like,
Well, that would be a great scene in a book. I think. Can't you feel
Uh-huh.
a character doing that? I just,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
wonderful.
I had
Now,
high
I remember-
aspirations.
I was gonna say, I remember as a kid though, pending on the day, sometimes the wind was fun because it was so strong that you could actually lean into it and it
Lean
would
into
hold
it.
you.
Yeah.
So it
Uh-huh.
really does depend on the perspective and the place too.
Uh-huh.
Right.
I like what Leslie
movie-
said about no control on that.
Yeah.
too.
The
Yeah.
movie Twister came to my mind,
Yeah.
and fear of, where do you hide?
Mhm.
How do you get away from it? And I haven't lived through really, really bad hurricanes, but the very first one, it sounded like a train was going through,
Ooh.
and it was kind of scary. I've learned since not to be as worried about it now that I know what it is, but that first time was scary.
Uh-huh. Now you guys have taken to I want to say something on Twister because I thought about a foreshadowing. There is a scene earlier in the movie Twister where they stop to visit somebody. It's one of the characters' mother or grandmother, and her whole front yard, I call them whirligigs, has
Mhm.
the what do you call it? What's this another word?
Yeah.
Wind chimes and
Wind
everything.
chimes and all that. And she talks about them and they're real gentle. And then they show
Mhm.
them later, they're scattered all over the place.
Right.
And that was a foreshadowing of the wind.
Yes, Aunt Meg.
Yeah, Aunt May. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
it was. And stuff. And I loved all the whirly gigs that she had in her front yard. I remember that. Now you guys all went to the extreme. What about a gentle breeze? I just said the wind. I didn't tell
Okay,
you
now,
harsh wind.
I have to think about this. In scripture, it talks about what time when God will shut up the four winds of the earth and there will be no winds on the earth. And I have thought about this. What would it be like in that time? And I'm sitting to think about, well, let's see, they invest in wind factories now, but can you imagine think about all the things that wind has a benefit for, and what would it
Yeah.
feel like to have no wind, the stifling heat? I mean, I think it would be pretty awful. So every time I feel a wind now and I think of that scripture, I thank God for the breeze and I
you.
thank God for the wind, because I know there will be a time when there will not be any.
That's great point. I hadn't even thought about that. But
was gonna say,
sometimes soft, gentle winds are very refreshing too.
I mean, how would all the plants pollinate without the
Yeah.
wind too?
Pam said there'd be can you imagine how many bugs we would have if we did have one? How would
Yep.
pollination? We'd have reduced probably, birds and bugs could still do that, but still wind helps a lot of that. It's
There are
eerie.
some countries right now that have very little wind, and I read a little bit about them, and it's hard, very
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Now, one thing you did mention, there's a symbolic thing on wind, and that writers use a lot of times, and it's a change. Something's
Mm.
coming. So you can use it as a change in the life of something coming, or the winds of change. We use the expression on that way. But
That's in Mary Poppins too, right? They're waiting for
yeah.
the winds to change, and then it does, and that's when she leaves, is when the wind changes.
And the wind
Mhm.
changes, and they have kites in that.
And they have the kites, and they have that weather vane on top of the one
Mhm.
guy's
Yeah.
house. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So think about that. So that would be a good movie to look at how they use wind all the way through symbolically. Okay, the last one, I'm not going to give you much information. I'm just going to say one word and see where you guys go with that. Clouds. What do you think, Melissa?
Oh man, the clouds out here in Wyoming are awesome. it's like a different painting every day, because the wide open spaces on the prairie, you see so many cloud formations, and they are neat, and windy days will change them. And so to see big billowy clouds, or long stratus like clouds, or ones, storm clouds of course are always make the coolest ones. We see a lot of anvil clouds out here, and they'll make a build that
Beautiful.
will just come and then totally fill everything. And so, yeah, cloud formations can do so much. They can cause wonder. They can cause expectancy. I can't talk today. But yeah, you know something's coming, or something's going to change based on the cloud formations.
That's right. And
I
I think,
love looking at the clouds and seeing the different shapes in them.
huh? I love that. I love that. And it really depends on clouds. There's so many different types.
Right.
So it really depends on the type of cloud. So you just can't say your main character looked up at the clouds. You probably do need some descriptive of what's going up there and what's that evoking on that way. You know, gray clouds could be, I'll go back to use Brandy's word, oppressive or depressing, maybe. It could be negative. Somehow sunny, spotty gray ones that Melissa first described are inspirational, uplifting, you know.
The wispy ones that are kind of like cotton candy. Those are
The
neat.
ones that you see beams of light from the sun
Yep.
shooting out of, those are awesome.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, Melissa.
And that brings the idea of sunrises and sunsets, you know, colors, shapes, all that goes on there. So just,
All right, can I ask a question?
I don't know if I have the answer.
Well, maybe. How many of you find it very rare to see a cloudless sky? We rarely see them. Are there some places that have them frequently?
We do.
Don't.
You have cloudless skies?
Yeah, completely blue sky, just a solid
Wow.
clear blue.
So it's very rare here, but I was wondering, you know, how that varies from region to region.
It probably does.
Oftentimes, you know, you were talking about the wind. A lot of times it's those almost windless days where you can see it, and then they do tend to get pretty stifling, but not always. Sometimes they are really nice days and they're just still.
I think it might depend on the geography too. If you're in front of a mountain, behind a mountain, that sort of thing, or if you're lower things. I don't know. We don't have we have cloudless days in Ohio, but it's rare, but we just had one Saturday because I've never taken a walk outside thinking, boy, there's not a cloud in the sky, you know. So
Yeah, when I see like a cloudless sky, I just like, I'm standing there in awe because it's something we don't see. It's like to see blue, just only blue. It just amazes me. Although I love clouds, but
yeah.
And there's a reason it's called a Carolina blue sky.
Oh,
Just saying.
But you know,
That's where I live.
that's a good point, is that how Brandy might write a story where her character's in awe of this blue sky, and Melissa's thinking, well, we have those every day, you know. So it's something to be aware of on that. So it's just, again, think about. I'm going to read you just a couple quick symbols and of how emotions and weathers are intervened. And we've talked about some of the stormy weather, stormy mood, sunny sky, sunny disposition, overcast, rainy, could be depressive. Okay, but listen to some of these depending on it. Spring is often a symbol of hope, new birth, rebirth. Summer is adulthood or happiness. Autumn, preparation for change, older age, harvesting maturity. Winter can be symbolized in death and decay. The calm before the storm can signal a trouble or change ahead. Clouds on the horizon, trouble ahead. Fog, we talked a little bit about fog, confusion, unaware. Rainbow, we haven't talked about rainbows, hope, a link between two extremes even on that. Snow, it could be coldness, but it could be cleansing, also could be softness, so it depends on. Wind, no change, windy, lots of changes. So how can we use these as writers? A lot of times a weather setting can heighten tension, can heighten fear. For example, I want to read you a paragraph from the book Lightning by Dean Koontz. He stared in awe and fear at the freakish celestial display. Another jagged crack opened in the heavens. The earth-seeking tip of the hot bolt, I think that was a little over descriptive, touched an iron street lamp only 60 feet away, and Maxwell cried out in fear. At that moment of contact, the night became incandescent, and the glass panes in the lamp exploded. The clap of thunder vibrated in Maxwell's teeth, and the porch floor rattled. Can you see how he built fear in that scene? On that, that's a lot of good description there. But anyway, and then I want to we're starting to go, so just a couple things on ways weather, and we've touched a little bit this can improve your story. Okay, and then I'll read the 7 and then have you guys maybe give examples or a reflection on that. First of all, it can set the mood on that way. And the example I'm going to use that, and I've told you guys this in the past, I'm an NCIS fan, the TV show, and at least up to this year when Gibbs isn't on, but that's another story. But anyway, I'm an NCIS fan, and I watched some of the older ones, and I've noticed when a main character dies, it's always rainy, it's always dark. They're staring out the window, or they're coming in from this crime scene and they're soaked on that. It's always rainy when the main character dies on that. So I think that's just interesting. In the Sixth Sense, the movie, whenever the little boy talked, it was cold. You saw his breath. You saw his breath in every scene. So little touches like that. Okay, so it can set the mood on that. It can be symbolic on that. To a character at war, snow at Christmas time may make him reminiscent of being home, because weather and its rotations, it builds in a pattern that you could throw into your scenes. It's symbolic of things repeating. Maybe it's symbolic of bringing back memories on that. It can raise the stakes, and this is where we're gonna it could build the thrill. It become life-threatening. This is a article that says life is complicated enough when the mafia and the CIA want you dead, but what if you were also trapped by a snowstorm in an isolated farmhouse without power? Think of all that stuff. It raises the stakes on that way. So going to talk a little bit about Twister. Here's where we're going to bring out Twister, that it's used as the plot device. And of course, Twister, the whole plot of the movie was the weather on that. But you can use them in smaller scenes, such as on a hot summer day at a broken air conditioner could be used the driving factor to make your character leave home on a particular day. I'm thinking about Brandy saying she sat outside on the front porch in the sun. Could cause a character to go out and then maybe see the neighbor across the street and whatever that led to. A light snow at the beginning of winter could be one thing that two characters bond over. It could be something they could talk about. Rain can spoil an outdoor gathering, sparking drama among the attendees. So you see how you could use them to further the plot. We kind of said raise the stakes. This is similar. It heightens the tension on that way. You could be in an isolated farmhouse in a snowstorm, but then your character is even worse because there's a serial killer stalking outside, and you can't get away, that way. It introduces irony. It's a beautiful spring morning, complete with chirping birds, but it's set in the middle of a muddy battlefield. Think about those two contrasts, how you could use that. It creates interesting settings. That's number 6 on that, because it really adds a dimension. It could bring in all our senses and bring the characters in and more. And it's really good imagery. You could use the imagery of a snowflake or the sun or no wind, Brandy, no wind on that way. So it could be a great setting tool, but it could be a good device in our own writing. So I have a couple tips at the end, as kind of a little assignments to think about, but we got just maybe a minute or so. Can any of you guys share on how you've used weather in your own writings?
Yeah, I used that in one of my Annie's fiction suspense stories. The very bad weather caused an automobile accident that was very crucial to the story. Yeah.
Okay.
The book is called Gathering Storms. I didn't title it, but that is
Yeah.
the title.
I love it. Very appropriate. Pam said she uses an eclipse. That's not weather related, but it's sort of. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's
cool,
interesting.
though.
I used
Melissa,
a sandstorm.
sandstorm. Okay.
Mhm.
Where was the setting for that? Just
It was a made up world, so fictional world.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Melissa, were you going to add something?
I was gonna say, I have used weather in a foreshadowing scene that you were curious about
Yeah.
that.
Can
and
you tell
it
us
was
about that?
it was a little cliche, but not too bad. It was in the middle scene, and I had in a previous scene there had been a raid, and the main character in the next scene is very invested in the people that were affected by this raid, but he doesn't know that it happened. And so he's walking out in the evening and dusk, and the skies are getting darker, and it's starting to feel oppressive, like there's this storm coming in, and he has this sense of foreboding that hits him with the storm, and he tries to dismiss it because it seems superstitious. But the guy used the weather to kind of oppress him and make him feel like there's something happening that he should know about, but it's just not there. He can't put his finger on it.
Good example. Good example on that way. On that. I'm going to get just a couple things to think about, and then we could bring everybody back in and wrap up here. That as a writer, keep noticing how weather is used in what you read, maybe in movies or TV shows. I think you can get ideas how to create moods on that way. Keep a weather diary. Look outside. Jan can look outside her window. I don't know the rest of you guys. It looks like Brandy and Johnny have windows there too, but you can look outside right now and describe the weather. This morning I looked out of my back porch and it's chillier. It was warm yesterday. Now it's chilly today. And these two sets of doves were out there all puffed up and and I said, yeah, I felt the same way. I said, on that way. So that you can train yourself as a writer to start noticing it in movies, but noticing it in your own stuff. And then sometimes if you're working on a particular scene, set a timer and change something in the weather, and set a timer for about 5 minutes and say, what would that do to that scene if it was 105, not 72? What would it do the change if it was negative 144? And not, how would it do? Or put that scene in a different season. Would it change it? Would it give you another idea? So those are just little homework assignments.
I've got a little tip too.
What do you got?
Well, I'm going to be, I am. I'm writing a series set in near the Charleston, South Carolina area, and will be writing a story set in Mackinac Island in Michigan. That story will be set in December. So this past December, I kept that on my weather app where you can put different cities. I've got Mackinac Island, I've got Charleston, and I take pictures of different days in December so that I would see what the weather was like, and I can go back to that when I actually sit down and write that story. And the same for Charleston, I'll take pictures so I know what like days it rained and what months and things. So I mean that's a really cool way. You can also look that stuff up online, but I thought it'd be cool to have the actual pictures of days, specific days.
I think that is a great idea. Or, it's similar to that. We talked about, listen to the weather report. They often give something, they'll say in 1855, da, 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 da. And it might be a really key thing to add to a story.
Wow.
On that. So the history of weather has things, and we kind of referred to something like that. Any other last minute thing before we sign off, and then we can have our quit recording and we can have our after party? Anything else that any of you guys want to add?
I keep thinking about going back to the beginning where you talked about the cliche, it was a dark and stormy night, and that weather can too frequently be used in our writing in a cliche way. So any ideas for how to avoid cliche writing when it comes to weather? And
the biggest thing I read, I don't know if Melissa, you got a point. The biggest thing that I read was just to be really aware of it and not overuse of that. Melissa, did you have something to add to that?
Consider contrast is what I was thinking. Like I have a scene with another focal character where she's sitting out in a field on this, it's a beautiful night, bright starry sky and just a gentle breeze over the fields, but she is conflicted inside and she's upset and feeling mocked by the weather because it's so perfect. Yeah, her life is just so falling apart. And so
Oh.
using contrasts, I think, can really bring a stark emotional experience to a reader when it's not fitting what's going on with the character.
Yeah, I was thinking, NCIS should do scenes where the main character dies and it's bright and sunny and shiny out, and all the characters are like,
Why is the world so perfect?
Yeah,
Right.
The world isn't perfect. The world isn't perfect on that. That's the biggest thing. I don't know, Johnny or Norma or Jan, do you have anything to add to how to be careful when you use weather?
I think you need to make sure you're seeing it through your character's point of view, that's a way to help, not make it be the omniscient thing, but make sure it's like it's your character reacting to whatever that weather is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Not using weather for the sake of using weather.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
in my stories, they're set in Ireland, and I always was led to, I've never been there myself, but I've heard that it's just common. Every day rain happens in various forms, and it's just a common thing. And so when I remember thinking, I don't include rain enough in my stories, and I thought I needed to have rain mentioned just to make it feel common. But then I thought that's drawing too much attention to the rain. When people who live there, it's everyday occurrence, they don't think about it.
Yeah.
So there's a point when you can be too fixated on it. It still needs to fit the scene and the characters.
I think it depends too on the genre, because like if you're writing that gothic stuff, you sort of do, the weather is more important. I don't want to say it's more important, but the weather becomes a character in certain types of books, right? And if that's the type of book you're writing, you want to make sure you're adding that element in a very realistic way.
And remember, it's a tool.
Mhm.
And you don't use every tool all the time, but you can use it as a tool. So I think that's the biggest awareness. So it's something different. Now, while we're still recording, because we're starting to go over here a little bit next week, I see Norma, you're in charge next week. Hope you remembered that.
Yep.
Anyway, we're having Julie Lavender on, right? Am I saying
Yes.
this right, guys? Okay. 10 top ways to win writers contests. So we're going to go quite a different topic next week after today. And so I wish everybody, thank you for being with us today, and we'll have you come on back in here in a minute, and we'll have our after party. Thank you for joining us if you watched on the replay, and everybody have a bright, sunny or overcast day, whichever you can do to be productive and get your writing done. Whatever suits your mood, get that work done on that. So bye everybody.